Now, it's hard to believe it was 11 years ago, on the day after Thanksgiving, that the first teaser trailer for The Force Awakens dropped and took the world by storm, getting around 60 million views on YouTube that first week alone, not to mention many million more elsewhere across the internet. It also that year took my family's Thanksgiving gathering by storm. I remember pretty much everyone there was talking about it and asking me about it since they all knew me as the Star Wars guy even before I was doing YouTube. And this was all even before the trailer came out. Again, it actually came out on the day after Thanksgiving. Nevertheless, they all knew and had heard about its coming and were super excited. Excited for the return of Star Wars after what felt like such a long time. At that point, it'd been over 9 years since Revenge of the Sith had come out, and for most of them, pretty much all of them other than me, they hadn't been keeping up with any of the rest of Star Wars in that time. For them, it was like it had simply vanished for roughly a decade, even though, yes, they were aware of the fact that there were books and comics and games and even an animated series and an animated movie at one point, but they weren't partaking or really caring about any of that. But anyway, the excitement for Star Wars that day, again, 11 years ago, it was real, at least at my Thanksgiving, and I'm gonna guess at other Thanksgivings across the country, as well as around the world to varying degrees, because mind you, most of my family are pretty big Star Wars fans, not to the degree I am. Again, they weren't keeping up with everything, but they're the type, the more casual type that loves the movies. They've seen them all multiple times, and they have some merchandise, a shirt or two, a coffee mug, a few other random things, that sort of fan, the more casual fan, let's call them. But the other day now at our Thanksgiving gathering, all the same people, more or less, and with a new Star Wars movie actually closer to us now than The Force Awakens had been to us then. And let's remember, Mando and Grogu comes out in roughly 6 months, and it's been almost 6 years since the last Star Wars movie came out, that being The Rise of Skywalker. But even with a new movie very much on the horizon and a trailer that had already come out for it, nobody mentioned Star Wars at all outside of me, who eventually I waited to see if anyone else would bring it up first. I was very curious. But eventually I brought it up because no one else had. And I asked a few things. I asked if they had heard of Starfighter, which no one had, and when explaining to them what it was or what we know about it thus far, no one seemed all that interested. I also asked if they'd seen the aforementioned trailer for The Mandalorian and Grogu that came out a couple months back now, and most of them hadn't even seen that, though they did kind of remember hearing about it having come out. And when I offered to bring it up on my phone, they said they'd finally check it out later. But overall, they just had no interest in talking about anything Star Wars. They weren't excited for its return because this time around it hadn't actually gone anywhere. Pretty much all of them had seen some of the Disney Plus shows, and thinking this might make for an interesting video, and here we are, and hopefully you're finding this interesting. But I even did a sort of impromptu survey where I asked anyone who would participate which of the Disney Plus shows they'd seen and what was the last one they watched before giving up on them, those sort of questions. And mind you, before I go on, yes, this is all an anecdote, this is just my personal experience. Your family gathering may have talked all about Star Wars this previous Thanksgiving, who knows? But anyway, pretty much all of them remembered The Mandalorian, the series, and had seen the first two seasons of it, and they said they'd enjoyed it quite a bit. But then they struggled to remember exactly which ones they had and hadn't seen after that. It all sort of blurred together, apparently. And when I asked why they stopped watching, and mind you, only one of them had watched Andor Season 2 and Skeleton Crew before it, none of them had seen either of those two shows, despite me talking both of them up on previous occasions. But the answer as to why they stopped was usually something along the lines of a shoulder shrug. They didn't know exactly how to articulate why they'd stopped watching. It was seemingly nothing in particular. None of them outright said it was because the shows were suddenly all bad or even mostly bad, though some of them did say there were varying degrees of good and bad when it came to the different shows. But it wasn't a simple case of I stopped watching because of this particular show, it wasn't good, or because of this or that. It was more a case, as far as I could tell, that they just didn't care that much about it. That when the Mandalorian series started 6 years ago now, and yes, it's been that long, but when that started, as Star Wars fans, they likely thought it's going to be great to watch a Star Wars series. It's going to be cool to get a lot more Star Wars in general, because they do see themselves, and they are, don't get me wrong, but they do see themselves as big Star Wars fans, even though if you had to sort of categorize them, again, I would put them in the more casual fan department. But as the shows kept coming and coming, that thought or idea of more and more Star Wars just wasn't as exciting anymore. It just wasn't that exciting to them to have Star Wars around all the time. Even though, as I was talking about moments ago, in all reality, before the Disney era began and streaming was a thing, Star Wars had already always been around, or had been a constant for decades. And like I said, most of them and most casual fans in general, I'd say, they knew about all that other stuff out there. They knew there were books and comics, that there were video games, and that there was even an animated show called Clone Wars. But they never got into any of it. Now, why is that? Well, sure, maybe some just don't like to read, or they don't want to play a video game, or they refuse to watch Clone Wars because it's animated, which means it's a cartoon, and that automatically means it's only for children, that sort of thing. But I think the answer to that goes a bit beyond what might seem like the obvious one at this point, that Star Wars being a rare thing that comes along in the form of 3 movies every decade or so is, in a sense, what they actually kind of like, or is just the right amount for them. That they like Star Wars to be a rare, special treat, if you will, not something you eat every day. But it's that, yes, they are Star Wars fans, they do love it, but they're not in love with Star Wars. When more is presented to them, at first it sounds great and like it'll be awesome to get more and a lot more at that. With the shows on Disney Plus, you're sometimes getting more than one a year, but they're actually not really that much into Star Wars. And I don't say this to put them down or something, or to put down Star Wars itself for that matter, but they really do see Star Wars as little more than those really cool movies that they love, not something they actually want to get into and follow. Because again, if they wanted it, it's been there the whole time. It just requires a little reading. Even my sister, who absolutely loves to read and loves Star Wars and loves to read sci fi and fantasy, though she's mainly into horror, she won't read a Star Wars book, despite me recommending several different ones to her over the years, and I do mean over the decades. And she has seen all the movies many, many, many times. Her house is full of Star Wars merchandise. She is a huge Boba Fett fan in particular, but she just doesn't want to get into Star Wars that much. She can't even be bothered to watch a show or two every year. Not because she's thought it's all been bad, though she did not like the Book of Boba Fett, but because, quite simply, it's just not something she wants to get into, especially when it's in the form of, to be blunt about it, more generic shows instead of the incredible action packed spectacle it can often be on the big screen. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there aren't a lot of hardcore Star Wars fans out there. There are, or were anyway. Disney has managed to lose quite a few of those. I'm just saying I think Star Wars used to have the perfect formula, where again, a new trilogy would come out every decade or generation, basically, and the whole world would get excited for it, and they'd go watch it, and they'd buy a ton of merch, and then the franchise would leave the spotlight, and us hardcore fans, well, we dwell in the shadows with our books and comics, playing our games, though yes, some other video games have gone mainstream or more mainstream, certainly, but we'd sit there and stay in love with it, enjoying our books that were essentially written just for us Star Wars fans. It didn't have to make basically any appeal to a wider audience, which is something else I think that hurts Star Wars these days. And I've talked about that before in other videos. That the more you try to broaden the audience and have Star Wars appeal to everyone, and mind you, Star Wars inherently has pretty broad appeal, hence why it has become so popular, or did. But the harder you try to bring in more people, the more you have a tendency to lose the whole more you tighten your grip, the more that slip through your fingers kind of thing. And though, sure, back in the day, let's call it when George Lucas was still in charge or still owned it, we would have loved to have had more movies or live action shows. I remember being excited every time Lucas mentioned he wanted to bring Star Wars to television, that he wanted to do that show called Underworld. But even though we may have wanted more, a lot of us, I think, we were content with what we had and again, how it was made for us. Again, I'm talking about the more hardcore fans about the books and the comics of the EU. We even had the Clone Wars animated series, which was enough, I think, to scratch the itch of getting some visual media, while also being a great onboard ramp into Star Wars for younger generations. Again, I think Star Wars used to have a perfect formula. You give the general audience and casual fans just enough every decade or so to go absolutely crazy over it and spend a ton of money, and then you cater to your hardcore fans the rest of the time. And Disney unwittingly broke that formula because of their greed, because they thought everyone would love more and more Star Wars. But in reality, I just don't think that most Star Wars fans honestly care that much about it, or care about it enough to really and truly get into it and to keep up with all of it like a sort of hobby, or the way the hardcore fans do. Well, that is all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what your experiences are with your friends and family when it comes to Star Wars. I'm assuming if you watch this video, you're probably a pretty big Star Wars fan, more on the hardcore side. So have you seen any sort of loss of interest in it when it comes to, again, your friends and family who are more on the casual side, or maybe you haven't? Whatever the case may be, though, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.